Mark stood in my kitchen and told me I had to leave my home by the end of the week. He said the doctors recommended assisted living, but his eyes were cold. I nodded slowly, my hands steady on the counter. I remembered the day I brought him home from the orphanage, a scared boy who needed a mother. Now he was a man ordering me out. I forced a smile and said I'd start packing. Inside, I decided to look through the old boxes in the attic before he could stop me. My heart ached, but my mind was clear. I needed to understand why he was doing this. It cost me my peace and the home I had built over decades. Mark left, saying he'd be back tomorrow with the paperwork. I climbed the creaky stairs, each step a reminder of the years gone by. In the attic dust, I found a sealed envelope tucked inside my late husband's Bible. It was addressed to me, never opened. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. It was from the orphanage director, written years ago, mentioning Mark's biological father was involved in a violent crime. The name was blurred, but my blood ran cold. I sat there in the dim light, realizing Mark might have known this all along, and I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. I told the clerk I needed adoption papers for genealogy. She eyed me over her glasses, saying those files were restricted. I insisted, my voice calm but firm. You've probably faced bureaucracy that makes you feel invisible. I waited on a hard plastic chair, watching the clock. I needed to see Mark's original birth certificate. It meant spending my time and risking that Mark would find out. After an hour, a younger worker took pity and slipped me a form to fill out. I wrote down Mark's full name and the orphanage details. Then she whispered that some files from that era were flagged due to a criminal case. My hands shook as I took the form back. Just as I was leaving, I saw Mark's car pull into the parking lot. He stepped out, his face tight with anger. He must have followed me. I hurried to my car, clutching the form, knowing he was closer than I thought. Back home, I locked the doors and spread the form on the kitchen table. I searched online for the criminal case mentioned. The internet is a blessing and a curse at my age. I found an old news article about a man convicted for a series of assaults 20 years ago. One victim was my daughter, Sarah. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring. The article said the man had a son who was placed in foster care. The dates matched when I adopted Mark. Learning this reopened old wounds I believed were long healed. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It was Mark, holding a bag of groceries like nothing was wrong. He said he wanted to check on me, but his eyes scanned the room, lingering on my laptop. I quickly closed the browser, my heart pounding. He stayed for tea, making small talk, but I felt his suspicion like a weight. After he left, I noticed he'd left his phone on the table. It buzzed with a notification from a legal firm about power of attorney. I picked it up, my hands steady now. I had proof he was moving faster than I thought. I called my lawyer, Mr. Evans, from the landline in my bedroom. My voice was low, explaining Mark's actions and what I'd learned. He advised me to revoke any documents I'd signed giving Mark authority. It meant legal fees and strain, but I had to protect myself. Mr. Evans said he'd send over papers by noon. While I waited, I sorted through Sarah's old photo albums, remembering her smile. Mark came back, demanding to know why I was on the phone so long. I told him it was a friend, but he didn't believe me. He grabbed my arm, his grip too tight, and said I was becoming paranoid. I pulled away, my skin burning where he'd held me. That's when I saw it. A faded tattoo on his wrist, the same symbol mentioned in the article about Sarah's killer. He saw me looking and yanked his sleeve down. His face went pale. He muttered something about needing to leave and stormed out. I stood there, trembling, knowing he had hidden this for years. The truth was out, and he knew I knew. After Mark left, I locked myself in and filled out the revocation forms Mr. Evans had emailed. I printed them at the small desk in the hall, my hands shaking only a little. I aimed to sign them before Mark returned. It meant the final break between us, the son I raised turning into a stranger. I heard a car outside and peered through the curtain. It was Mark, talking on his phone, pacing by his vehicle. He seemed agitated, probably planning his next move. I finished signing and sealed the envelope to mail. Just then, my phone rang. It was the orphanage director from years ago, returning my call. She said she remembered Mark's case and that his father had confessed to more crimes, including details about Sarah. She offered to meet me tomorrow. I hung up, my mind racing. Mark was knocking on the door now, louder each time. I slipped the envelope into my purse and headed to the back door, knowing I had to leave before he got in. The lock clicked behind me, and I stepped into the cool evening, unsure where to go next. I hurried down the alley behind my house, the gravel crunching under my worn shoes. My purse was clutched tight against my side, the envelope inside containing the forms to revoke Mark's power over my life. His angry shouts echoed from the front door, but I didn't look back. I had to reach the post office before it closed at 5 to mail them, or I might lose everything by morning. The evening air was cool, but I felt a sweat break out on my forehead. An elderly woman like me shouldn't have to sneak away like a thief. I turned onto Main Street, where people were heading home from work. I spotted a bus stop and decided to take it downtown to avoid being followed. As I waited, I saw Mark's dark sedan drive past slowly, his eyes scanning the sidewalks. I ducked behind a bus shelter, my heart pounding. The bus arrived with a hiss, and I boarded, finding a seat in the back where I could see if anyone followed. The ride was bumpy, and I held onto the strap, my mind racing. I needed a safe place to stay tonight, maybe a hotel, but money was tight. Getting off near the post office, I noticed a man in a crisp suit watching me from across the street. He didn't look familiar, but he started walking towards me with purpose. I quickened my pace, but he called out, "Mrs. Wilkins?" I froze, turning slowly. He introduced himself as Mr. Graves, a lawyer from the firm handling Mark's case. He said Mark had filed an emergency petition for guardianship, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. My hands trembled, but I stood straight and told him I had documents proving I was sound of mind. He smiled thinly and said the hearing was scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. Then he handed me a folded paper, a subpoena to appear. I took it, my fingers cold. As he walked away, I saw Mark standing at the corner, his arms crossed. He nodded at the lawyer, and I understood they were in this together. I had less than 24 hours to gather evidence and stop this legal theft. The post office loomed ahead, but now it felt like a trap. I pushed open the post office door, the bell chiming overhead. The place was nearly empty, with only one clerk at the counter stacking parcels. I hurried over, my breath shallow, and handed him the envelope addressed to Mr. Evans. He stamped it without a word, and I watched it disappear into the bin, a small victory. As I turned, I caught sight of Mark through the glass door, his face pressed against his phone, gesturing angrily. I slipped into a side aisle lined with packing supplies, my heart thudding. I needed to contact the orphanage director immediately. Spotting a payphone near the restrooms, I fumbled for coins and dialed the number I'd saved. Mrs. Dolan answered on the second ring, her voice soft with concern. I explained my situation, and she agreed to meet me at a quiet cafe across town in an hour. Hanging up, I felt a flicker of hope. I exited through the back door into an alley, the smell of garbage thick in the air. Hailing a taxi, I gave the address and sank into the seat, watching the streets glide by. The driver was silent, and I appreciated the peace. At the cafe, Mrs. Dolan was already in a corner booth, a thin file folder on the table between us. She pushed it towards me, her eyes sad. "This is everything," she said. "Mark's father confessed to multiple crimes, including your daughter's murder. Mark visited him regularly, starting when he was 16. I opened the file, my hands trembling. There were photos, documents, and a letter from Mark to his father, talking about revenge. My vision blurred with tears. Mrs. Dolan patted my hand and left. Alone, I sipped my cold coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stood up, clutching the file. Outside, the night was dark, and a car idled at the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Mark's friend, the one who worked for the building management. "Need a ride, Grandma?" he sneered, stepping out. I backed away, but he moved closer, his shadow looming over me. I tightened my grip on the file, knowing I had to run. I darted into a nearby pharmacy, the bright lights blinding after the dark street. The man didn't follow, but I saw his car still parked outside. I needed to find a place to hide and review the file. I had to grasp how completely Mark had deceived me before the hearing. I was exhausted and filled with a fear that gnawed at my chest. I bought a bottle of water and sat on a stool by the window, pretending to read a magazine. Inside the file, I found copies of prison visitation records. Mark had seen his father dozens of times over the years, always around the anniversary of Sarah's death. There was a note in Mark's handwriting. "She will pay for what her family did." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the pages. I had to get to a safe location, maybe the public library, to make copies. As I stood, my phone rang again. It was Mr. Evans, my lawyer. He said he received my forms and would file a counter-petition first thing in the morning. He advised me to stay away from home tonight. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a sliver of relief. Leaving the pharmacy, I took a different route, weaving through side streets. I heard footsteps behind me and quickened my pace, but they matched mine. I glanced back and saw a woman in a nurse's uniform. She looked familiar from the clinic I visited last month. She smiled warmly and said, "Mrs. Wilkins? I thought that was you. Are you okay?" I nodded, but her eyes darted past me, and I noticed she was holding a phone with Mark's picture on the screen. I turned and hurried away, my mind racing. Had Mark enlisted others to track me? I reached the library just as it was closing, the doors locking behind me. I was alone on the steps, the file heavy in my hands, and the night felt endless. I found a bench in a small park a few blocks away, under a dim streetlight. I needed to plan my next steps carefully. The hearing was only hours away, and I had to present my evidence clearly. I had to reveal what Mark knew about his father's crimes and why he was doing it. It meant facing the pain of Sarah's loss again and the hurt from the son I had raised. I opened the file again, using my phone's flashlight to read. There was a typed statement from Mrs. Dolan detailing how Mark had threatened her when she tried to tell me the truth years ago. My heart ached for the pain he had caused. Suddenly, a patrol car pulled up nearby, and an officer stepped out. He asked if I was all right, noting the late hour. I explained I was waiting for a ride, but he insisted on checking my ID. As he radioed it in, I worried Mark might have reported me missing or unstable. The officer returned, saying everything was fine, but advised me to find shelter. He drove off, and I felt a wave of vulnerability. I decided to walk to a 24-hour diner I knew, where I could sit and gather my thoughts. The diner was brightly lit, with a few late-night customers. I ordered tea and spread the file on the table. As I reviewed the documents, a waitress refilled my cup and whispered, "I heard about your situation from a regular. Be careful. Mark's been asking around for you." I looked up, startled, but she moved away quickly. I realized my safe spaces were shrinking. Finishing my tea, I packed up and headed for the door. Outside, I saw Mark's car parked across the street, engine off, but someone inside. I turned and walked briskly in the opposite direction, my pulse quickening. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever, but I had to make it through the night. I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash from my emergency fund. The room was sparse, but clean, and I locked the door behind me, sliding the chain into place. I hoped to rest and get ready for the hearing, but my mind kept churning. A deep loneliness settled over me, knowing the son I loved had turned against me. I laid out the file on the bed, organizing the pages into a clear timeline. There were bank statements showing large withdrawals Mark had made from my account over the past year, supposedly for home repairs that never happened. I hadn't noticed because I trusted him. You might understand how easy it is to overlook things when family is involved. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously, and a woman's voice said she was a social worker assigned to my case. Mark had requested a wellness check. She asked if I was safe and coherent. I assured her I was fine and explained the situation briefly. She seemed skeptical, but said she would note it in her report. After hanging up, I felt a new pressure. Mark was using the system against me. I needed to sleep, but every noise made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard a car pull into the parking lot and doors slam. Peering through the curtain, I saw Mark and his lawyer talking under a light pole, pointing toward my room. My breath caught. I gathered my things quickly, planning to leave through the back window. Just as I unlocked it, someone knocked on the door. A firm, official rap. A voice called out, "Police, open up." I hesitated, wondering if it was a trick. Then I saw a uniformed officer through the peephole. I opened the door slowly, and he handed me a notice. The hearing had been moved up to 7 a.m. due to emergency circumstances. Mark stood behind him, smirking. I had only a few hours to get to the courthouse and face him down. I locked the motel room door behind the officer, my hands trembling. Mark's smirk through the window felt like a knife in my chest. I had to get to the courthouse by 7 a.m., just a few hours away, with all my evidence intact. Grabbing my purse and the file, I peered out the back window. It led to a dimly lit alley. I climbed out quietly, my joints aching from the stress and lack of sleep. The cool night air bit through my thin coat, but I pushed on, heading toward the main road to flag down a taxi. Every shadow seemed to move, and I kept glancing back, expecting Mark's car to appear. Reaching the street, I saw a cab and waved it down. As I slid into the back seat, I gave the driver the courthouse address. He nodded, and we pulled away. I checked the file again, making sure the visitation records and Mrs. Dolan's statement were in order. This fight had taken my peace from me, turning my golden years into a nightmare. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Evans. "Meet me at the courthouse early. I'll review your documents." I replied quickly, feeling a sliver of hope. But then I noticed a dark sedan following us, matching the description of Mark's car. My stomach tightened. I asked the driver to take a detour through the busier downtown streets, hoping to lose them. He complied, weaving through traffic, and for a moment, the sedan disappeared. I breathed a sigh of relief. But as we turned onto the courthouse street, I saw Mark standing on the steps, talking to his lawyer. They were already here, waiting. The taxi stopped, and I paid the driver, stepping out into the pale morning light. Mr. Evans hurried over, his face grim. "Mark filed a last-minute motion," he said. "He's brought a doctor who claims you're suffering from dementia." I froze, the file feeling heavy in my hands. I had to prove them wrong, but the doubt in the air was thick. Inside the courthouse, the halls were echoing and cold. Mr. Evans led me to a small room where we could prepare. I needed to stay calm and present my case clearly, showing the judge that Mark's motives were rooted in revenge, not care. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I laid out the file on a table. Mr. Evans scanned the documents, nodding slowly. "This is strong," he said, "but we need to counter the doctor's testimony immediately." I felt the weight of years of trust broken, and my hands were cold. Just then, the door opened, and a court officer announced the hearing would start in 10 minutes. As we gathered our things, Mark walked past the room, shooting me a look of pure hatred. It chilled me to the bone. We entered the courtroom, a formal space with wooden benches and a high judge's bench. I took a seat beside Mr. Evans, my heart pounding. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order. Mark's lawyer stood first, presenting the doctor's report that alleged I was confused and unable to manage my affairs. He mentioned missed appointments and memory lapses, things I knew were exaggerated. When it was our turn, Mr. Evans stood and began outlining the evidence against Mark. He described the adoption records and the connection to Sarah's killer. The judge listened intently, her expression neutral. Then Mark was called to the stand. Under oath, he denied knowing about his father's crimes until recently and claimed he only wanted what was best for me. But when Mr. Evans showed him the visitation records, Mark stammered, his confidence cracking. He admitted he had visited his father, but said it was out of curiosity. The judge ordered a short recess, and as we stood, I saw Mark whispering urgently to his lawyer. They seemed agitated, and I knew we had shaken them. But as I turned to leave the room, a bailiff handed me a note. It was from Mrs. Dolan, saying she couldn't testify in person because she'd been threatened. My key witness was gone. Back in the preparation room, I slumped into a chair, the note crumpled in my hand. Without Mrs. Dolan, my case was weaker, and I had to find another way to prove Mark's deception. Mr. Evans suggested we focus on the financial records showing Mark's unauthorized withdrawals. I agreed, pulling out the bank statements from my file. The numbers blurred as I tried to focus, the lack of sleep catching up to me. Just then, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. I answered quietly, and a woman's voice said, "I'm a nurse from the clinic. I overheard Mark offering money to Dr. Briggs for that dementia report." My breath caught. This was the break I needed. I thanked her and quickly explained to Mr. Evans. He nodded, making a note to call her as a witness if possible. The recess ended, and we returned to the courtroom. The judge listened as Mr. Evans presented the financial evidence, highlighting large sums taken without my consent. Mark's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled, asking for more details. Then Mr. Evans mentioned the new testimony about the bribed doctor. Mark's face turned pale, and he glared at me. The judge called for a brief adjournment to review the documents privately. As we waited, Mark approached me, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I'll make sure you end up in a home where no one visits." I stood my ground, but his words stung. When the judge returned, she announced she needed more time and would reconvene after lunch. I felt exhausted, but determined. Mr. Evans and I decided to grab a quick bite in the courthouse cafeteria. As we sat down, I saw Mark across the room, on his phone, looking furious. Then he walked over, his expression fake and calm. "Mum," he said, "can we talk alone for a minute? I think we can settle this without the court." I hesitated, knowing his tricks, but Mr. Evans nodded cautiously. I agreed, and Mark led me to a secluded corner near the restrooms. Once we were alone, his smile dropped. "Sign over the house to me now, or I'll release photos of Sarah's crime scene to the press," he whispered. I froze, my blood running cold. He had kept evidence from her murder all these years. I stared at Mark, my mind reeling. He had photos of Sarah's crime scene. How could he be so cruel? I needed to refuse his demand without escalating things, but the threat to my daughter's memory was unbearable. I had to stall him until the hearing resumed, so I could expose this to the judge. I forced a calm tone and said, "I need time to think, Mark. Let's discuss this after the hearing." He sneered, "You have until 2 p.m., or I'll make the call." He walked away, and I returned to Mr. Evans, my hands shaking. I told him everything, and his face hardened. "We have to include this in our evidence," he said. "It shows extortion." We hurried back to the courtroom, where the judge was taking her seat. Mr. Evans requested an emergency addition to the testimony, explaining Mark's threat. The judge listened, her brow furrowed, and allowed it. When Mark was recalled, Mr. Evans confronted him with the allegation. Mark denied it at first, but then Mr. Evans played a recording I hadn't known he'd made. Our conversation in the cafeteria corner. Mark's voice filled the room, threatening me with the photos. The courtroom fell silent. Mark's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled, her expression stern. She asked Mark to explain, and he stumbled over his words, finally admitting he had the photos, but claimed he was trying to protect me from the pain. The judge shook her head, clearly unconvinced. She called for another short break to consider her ruling. As we stood, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Mr. Evans patted my shoulder, saying we had a strong chance now. But when I looked toward the door, I saw Mark being escorted out by a bailiff. He was being held for questioning about potential crimes. I sat back down, overwhelmed. The judge returned and announced that the guardianship petition was denied, and she was referring Mark's actions to the district attorney. I should have felt victorious, but as I gathered my things, a court officer handed me a sealed envelope. It was from Mark, left before he was taken away. I opened it slowly, and inside was a single photo, a childhood picture of him and me, with a note, "You were never my real mother." The pain was sharper than any court ruling. Leaving the courthouse, I felt hollow. The legal battle was won, but my family was shattered. Mr. Evans walked me to his car, offering to drive me home. I needed to reclaim my house and my life, but I had lost the son I had loved for decades. As we drove, I stared out the window, the city passing in a blur. When we arrived, my house stood quiet, the lawn overgrown from neglect. I thanked Mr. Evans and stepped inside, the familiar smells bringing no comfort. I aimed to clean up and rest, but first I had to ensure Mark couldn't return. I changed the locks using a kit I'd bought earlier, my hands clumsy but determined. As I worked, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery man with a package, a small box from Mark, sent before the hearing. I opened it cautiously, and inside were more photos of Sarah's crime scene, along with a key. A note read, "This is for the storage unit where I kept everything. Think about what you've done." I sank into a chair, tears finally coming. The pressure of his hatred was overwhelming. I called the police to report the harassment, and an officer came to collect the box as evidence. After he left, I wandered through the house, touching memories, photos of Mark as a boy, his drawings on the fridge. In his old room, I found a journal tucked under the mattress. I sat on the bed and opened it, my heart heavy. The entries detailed his visits to his father, his growing anger, and his plan to take everything from me as payback for Sarah's death. The last page was recent. She doesn't know I've already transferred the savings to an offshore account. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. I had to contact the bank immediately to freeze my assets. As I reached for the phone, it rang. It was the bank manager, asking to verify a large transaction Mark had attempted this morning. I explained the situation, and he put a hold on the account. Hanging up, I felt a small victory, but the emptiness remained. I knew this wasn't over. Mark would find another way. I decided to sell the house and move away, somewhere he couldn't find me. But for now, I locked the doors and sat in the silence, wondering how it had come to this. I woke to the sound of the front door handle jiggling violently, the new lock I'd installed holding firm against the force. My heart hammered in my chest as I peered through the peephole, but the porch was empty. I had to get to the storage unit today before Mark or his allies could clear it out. I called the police, and after a brief report, I drove across town, the key from Mark's package burning a hole in my pocket. The storage facility was quiet, rows of identical units stretching out under the grey morning sky. I found number 214 and slid the key into the lock. Inside, stacked boxes held more of Sarah's photos and old case files, but beneath them, I discovered a leather-bound ledger. It listed payments to a social worker, a doctor, and even a city inspector, all dated over the past year. My hands trembled as I photographed each page, the scope of Mark's deception taking my breath away. This evidence could clear my name completely, but obtaining it cost me any last shred of hope for reconciliation. As I closed the unit, a car engine revved nearby, a dark sedan idling at the end of the row. I hurried to my car, my pulse racing, and drove off, watching the sedan follow in my rearview mirror. I took several turns, finally losing it in a neighborhood I knew well. Back home, I found a bright orange notice tacked to my door. A city code violation for overgrown vegetation, citing a fine and mandatory cleanup within 48 hours or facing liens. I knew Mark had orchestrated this through his contacts. Inside, I spread the ledger photos on the kitchen table, determined to bring them to my lawyer by noon. But as I reached for the phone, it rang, a blocked number. I answered, and a distorted voice said, "Drop the evidence, or the next violation will be unlivable." I hung up, my skin crawling. The pressure was mounting, and I had to move faster than ever. I gathered the ledger photos and drove to Mr. Evans's office, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I needed to present this new evidence to him immediately to strengthen my case against Mark's network. The morning traffic was heavy, and every stoplight felt like an eternity. Parking downtown, I hurried into the building, the envelope of photos clutched tightly. Mr. Evans reviewed them in his quiet office, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This confirms corruption," he said, "but we'll need to involve the district attorney directly." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. This would drag things out, costing me more in legal fees and emotional strain. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your house is being watched. Leave now." I glanced around the parking garage, but saw no one. Driving home, I took a longer route, my mind racing. When I arrived, the code violation notice was still there, but now a white van was parked across the street, its windows tinted dark. I entered through the back, locking the door behind me. Inside, I decided to start packing valuables, just in case. In the hall closet, I found an old box of Mark's school things I'd forgotten about. Among his report cards and toys was a sealed envelope addressed to him from his father, postmarked years ago. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter praising Mark for avenging him and mentioning a safe deposit box key taped to the bottom. My hands shook as I peeled it off. A small brass key from a local bank. This was another piece of the puzzle, one Mark had hidden from me. Just then, the doorbell rang, and through the window, I saw a woman in a city inspector's uniform holding a clipboard. She called out, "I'm here for the compliance check." I stayed quiet, watching her write something down before leaving. But as she walked away, she glanced toward the van and nodded. I knew I was running out of time. I drove to the bank, listed on the key, my mind focused on finding what was in that safe deposit box. It was the only branch in town, and I hoped to access it before Mark could. The bank was busy, and I waited in line, my palms sweaty. When I reached the teller, I showed the key and my ID, but she said only Mark was authorized to open the box. I explained the situation, and she called over the manager, a stern man who remembered me from previous visits. After some persuasion, he agreed to let me view the box with a bank employee present, given the legal circumstances. We went to the vault, and the employee opened the box for me. Inside, I found stacks of cash, jewelry I recognized as Sarah's, and a folded document. A life insurance policy on me, with Mark as the beneficiary, taken out years ago. My stomach turned. He had been planning this for a long time. I took photos of everything, then asked the manager to secure the box as evidence. Leaving the bank, I felt a cold clarity. I had to sever all ties legally and financially. But as I stepped outside, I saw the white van from earlier parked nearby, and a man in casual clothes leaning against it, talking on his phone. He looked directly at me, then got into the van and drove off. I hurried to my car, locking the doors. Driving home, I called Mr. Evans to update him, and he advised me to stay with a friend tonight. I agreed. But when I pulled into my driveway, I found the front door slightly ajar. The lock was broken. Someone had been inside. I entered cautiously, the house eerily silent. Nothing seemed stolen, but on the kitchen table, where I'd left the ledger photos, was a single fresh rose and a note. "Stop, or you'll lose more than your home." I backed out slowly, my heart pounding, and drove to a motel, knowing I wasn't safe anywhere. From the motel room, I called the police to report the break-in, then phoned a locksmith to meet me at the house later. I needed to reclaim my home and secure it permanently, but the fear was paralyzing. Mr. Evans emailed me the drafted papers to revoke all of Mark's authorities and file a restraining order. I printed them at the motel office, my hands steadying with each page. This fight had taken my peace of mind, and I felt older than my years. Returning to my house, the locksmith arrived and installed heavy-duty locks on all doors and windows. As he worked, a neighbour, Mrs. Gable, came over, saying she'd seen a unfamiliar car circling the block multiple times last night. She described it as a dark sedan, the same one that had followed me. I thanked her and went inside, the new locks clicking into place. I spent the afternoon on the phone with the insurance company, cancelling the policy Mark had taken out, and with the bank, freezing any joint accounts. Each call was a battle, but I persisted. By evening, I felt a small sense of control returning. I decided to sort through Sarah's old room, where I kept her memory alive. In her closet, behind a stack of boxes, I found a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was a small journal of hers I'd never seen, detailing her fears about a man following her before she died. The same man, Mark's father. She had written his description and license plate number. My eyes filled with tears. This was evidence she'd gathered herself. I clutched the journal to my chest, feeling her presence. But as I stood, my doorbell rang. A delivery man with a bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Thinking of you," with no name. I threw them out, my skin crawling. Later that night, I heard a car slow down outside, its headlights sweeping across my windows. I didn't sleep, waiting for the next move. The next morning, I met with Mr. Evans to sign the restraining order and provide the new evidence from Sarah's journal. I had to ensure Mark was legally barred from contacting me or accessing my property. The courthouse felt familiar now, but the stares from clerks made me uneasy. After filing the papers, I drove to the police station to hand over Sarah's journal and the safe deposit box photos. The detective on duty listened carefully, promising to reopen her case with this new information. Leaving the station, I felt a weight lift, but the emotional toll was heavy. I was burying my daughter's memory again to save myself. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store for essentials. As I loaded bags into my car, a woman approached me, introducing herself as Lena, Mark's ex-girlfriend. She said she had information but was afraid to talk openly. We sat in a nearby cafe, and she revealed that Mark had bragged about manipulating the system to inherit everything, even mentioning a backup plan if the courts failed. She handed me a USB drive, saying it contained emails between Mark and his father discussing the revenge plot. I thanked her, my hands trembling as I pocketed the drive. Back home, I plugged it into my computer and found detailed plans, including falsifying medical records and bribing officials. This was the proof I needed to end this for good. But as I saved the files, my computer screen flickered and went black. A message popped up. "You should have stopped when you had the chance." Then the power in the house cut out entirely. I sat in the sudden silence, the only light from my phone, and heard footsteps on the porch. I grabbed my phone and hid in the hall closet, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The front door creaked open, and a voice called out, "Mum? I'm home." It was Mark, and he was inside. I held my breath in the closet, the musty scent of old coats filling my nostrils. Mark's footsteps echoed through the house, each heavy thud making the floorboards creak. I had to stay hidden until the police arrived. Any movement could betray my position. The 911 operator was still on the line, her voice a soft, steady presence in the darkness. I could hear Mark calling out, "Mom, I know you're here. We need to talk about this like adults." His words were smooth, but I remembered the threatening note and the broken lock. This confrontation was costing me the last shred of peace I had, turning my home into a battlefield. Suddenly, the closet door handle jiggled, and I pressed myself against the wall, my pulse racing. Then, a loud knock on the front door distracted him. The police had arrived. Mark's footsteps retreated towards the entrance. I heard muffled voices from the hallway, Mark explaining he was worried about me and that I might be unstable. One officer asked to see me, and Mark said I was probably hiding due to confusion. Knowing I had to act, I pushed the closet door open slowly, stepping into the dim light of the hall. The officers looked relieved to see me, but Mark's face was a mask of controlled anger. I showed them the restraining order and recounted the break-in, my voice shaking but clear. As the officers were about to escort Mark out for questioning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Evans. "The district attorney is filing charges based on the evidence from the USB drive. Stay safe." Mark must have noticed my slight smile because he lunged towards me, shouting, "You'll regret this!" The officers quickly restrained him, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they led him away, He glared at me and hissed, "This isn't over. I have friends in high places." I stood alone in the hallway, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Then I spotted a small folded note on the floor where Mark had been standing. I bent down to pick it up, my knees protesting. Unfolding it, I saw a list of names, judges, city officials, and amounts of money. He had bribed more people than I imagined, and I realized the fight was far from over. The next morning, I met with Mr. Evans in his office, the folded note from Mark's pocket laid out on his desk. I needed to hand this over to the authorities to dismantle the corruption network Mark had built. The sunlight streamed through the window, but I felt no warmth. Mr. Evans examined the list, his brow furrowed. "This implicates several powerful people," he said. "We'll need to be careful." I nodded, knowing that pursuing this would mean more stress and potential danger, but I had to see it through. As we discussed next steps, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously, and a man's voice, deep and authoritative, said, "Mrs. Wilkins, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Let's not make this messy." I hung up quickly, my hands trembling. Mr. Evans advised me to change my number and increase security at home. After leaving his office, I drove to the police station to deliver the note. The detective I spoke with seemed interested, but warned me that without more evidence, it might be hard to prove. Back home, I decided to install a security system, paying for it from my dwindling savings. As the technician worked, Mrs. Gable came over with a plate of cookies, saying she'd heard about the break-in and wanted to check on me. I appreciated the gesture, but I noticed her glancing around nervously. After she left, I found a small listening device attached to the bottom of the plate. My blood ran cold. Was she involved? I removed it and called the police, but they said it was likely planted by someone else. That evening, I received an email from an encrypted address. "Drop the list, or we'll release private photos of you." I didn't have any such photos, but the threat was clear. I forwarded it to Mr. Evans and the police, then sat in my living room, the silence feeling heavier than ever. Just as I was about to go to bed, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery man with a package. I didn't order anything. I opened the door slightly, and he handed me a small box before quickly leaving. Inside was a dead rose and a note. "Last warning." I closed the door, my heart pounding, and knew I had to act fast. I decided to visit the storage unit again, hoping to find more clues about Mark's plans. The unit had been sealed by the police, but I had a copy of the key. I needed to see if there was anything else hidden there that could help. Driving there, I kept checking my rearview mirror, but no one seemed to follow. The storage facility was quiet, and I let myself into Unit 214. Inside, I moved boxes aside, my back aching from the effort. Under a false bottom in one of the crates, I found a second ledger, this one detailing payments to private investigators who had been watching me for months. There were photos of me at the grocery store, at the bank, even visiting Sarah's grave. The invasion of privacy made me sick to my stomach. This evidence showed how deeply Mark had planned his revenge, costing me any sense of normalcy. As I was photographing the pages, I heard a car pull up outside the unit. I peeked through the door crack and saw the white van from before. A man got out and started walking towards my unit. I quickly hid behind some boxes, my phone on silent. He tried the door, but it was locked from the inside. He muttered something into a phone and left. I waited until he was gone, then hurried to my car. Driving home, I realized I had to go into hiding for a while. I packed a bag with essentials and booked a room at a different motel under a false name. That night, as I settled in, my phone rang. It was Lena, Mark's ex-girlfriend. She said she was scared because someone had been asking about her, and she thought it was related to the USB drive she gave me. She offered to meet me tomorrow at a public place to hand over more evidence. I agreed, but I worried it might be a trap. The next morning, I went to the agreed-upon cafe early to scope it out. Lena arrived, looking nervous. She handed me another USB drive and said, "This has emails between Mark and a judge. Be careful." As she turned to leave, two men in suits approached her and escorted her away. I stayed back, watching in horror. One of the men looked at me and nodded slowly as if warning me. I left quickly, the new drive in my pocket, knowing the network was more extensive than I thought. Back at the motel, I plugged the new USB drive into my laptop. It contained emails between Mark and a judge named Harold Branson, discussing how to sway the guardianship case in Mark's favor. There were also references to a cleanup crew that handled loose ends. I knew I had to get this to the DA immediately, but I was afraid for my safety and Lena's. I called Mr. Evans, and he advised me to come to his office with the drive. I drove there, taking back roads to avoid being followed. In his office, we reviewed the emails, and he contacted the DA's office to set up a meeting. While we waited, I felt the weight of the situation. My actions were putting others in danger, and I wondered if it was worth it. Later that day, I received a call from the detective working on Sarah's case. He said that with the new evidence from her journal and the USB drives, they were reopening the investigation into her murder and looking into Mark's father's connections. It was a small victory, but it brought back the pain of losing her. As I left Mr. Evans's office, I saw a familiar face in the parking lot, Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. She approached me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said. "They threatened my grandson if I didn't plant that device. I had no choice." I forgave her, realizing how far-reaching the corruption was. She gave me a name, Arthur Klein, a city councilman who was on Mark's list. I thanked her and drove back to the motel. But when I arrived, my room had been ransacked. My laptop was gone, and the USB drives were missing. On the bed was a note. "We have what we need. Stop now, or else." I sat on the floor, feeling defeated. But then I remembered I had backed up the files to a cloud storage account Mr. Evans had set up. I still had the evidence, but I was more vulnerable than ever. I called the police to report the burglary, then contacted Mr. Evans to ensure the cloud backups were safe. He confirmed they were secure and advised me to check into a women's shelter for the night. I needed to find a safe place where I couldn't be found, but the thought of relying on strangers was daunting. The police arrived at the motel, took my statement, and dusted for fingerprints, but they doubted they'd find much. As I was packing my few remaining things, a woman from the shelter arrived to pick me up. Her name was Maria, and she was kind and efficient. At the shelter, I was given a small room with a lock on the door. I felt a temporary sense of safety, but the isolation was overwhelming. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I went to the common area to make some tea. There, I met an older woman named Edith, who was also hiding from an abusive family situation. We talked, and I shared a bit of my story. She listened intently, then said, "I used to work for the city council. I know Arthur Klein. He's dirty, but he has weaknesses." She offered to help me gather more information on him. It was an unexpected turn, and I felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Edith and I planned to visit the city records office to look into Klein's dealings. As we were leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked across the street with two men inside, watching us. One of them pointed at me and spoke into a phone. I grabbed Edith's arm and we hurried back inside. From the window, I saw the car drive away slowly. Edith said, "They know you're here. We need to move quickly. I nodded, my heart racing. We decided to go to the records office anyway, but I knew we were being watched. As we stepped outside, a van pulled up, and the side door slid open. A man I recognized from the storage unit stepped out and said, "Get in, Mrs. Wilkins. We need to talk." I froze, unsure whether to run or comply. The man from the storage unit stepped closer, his hand outstretched as if to guide me into the van. I stood my ground, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had to refuse his demand and find a way to alert the shelter staff without escalating the situation. Edith tightened her grip on my arm, her breath quick beside me. Our defiance meant we faced immediate danger, right here on the sidewalk. The man's eyes narrowed, and he gestured to the van, where another figure sat behind the wheel, engine idling. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said, his voice low but firm. Just then, a shelter volunteer emerged from the building, calling out to ask if we needed help. The man hesitated, his confidence wavering for a moment. I seized the opportunity and shouted, "Call the police!" The volunteer ducked back inside, and the man cursed under his breath. He backed away toward the van, pointing a finger at me. "You'll regret this," he snarled, before sliding the door shut and speeding off. Edith and I hurried back into the shelter, my legs trembling. Inside, the staff locked the doors and called the authorities. As we waited, Edith handed me a slip of paper with an address. A private investigator she trusted, someone who could help us gather evidence on Arthur Klein safely. I tucked it into my pocket, feeling a mix of fear and determination. The police arrived, took our statements, and increased patrols around the shelter. Later that evening, I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Evans. "The DA is moving forward with the case based on the cloud evidence. Stay hidden." I replied, thanking him, but my mind was on the investigator. The next morning, I decided to visit him, using the cash I had left for a taxi. As I stepped outside, a patrol car was parked nearby, offering some comfort. But when I reached the taxi stand, I saw the white van again, parked a block away. The side door was open, and a different man was watching me through binoculars. I quickly got into a cab and gave the driver the investigator's address. But as we pulled away, the van began to follow. I told the driver to take a detour through the busiest streets, hoping to lose them. He nodded, weaving through traffic, and for a moment, the van disappeared. But when we turned onto the investigator's street, it was there again, waiting. The driver dropped me off, and I hurried toward the building, but the van's door slid open, and the man from earlier stepped out, holding a cell phone. "Mrs. Wilkins," he called. "We have Edith. Come quietly, or she gets hurt." I froze, my hand on the door handle, knowing I had to choose between saving her or saving myself. I stood on the steps of the investigator's office, the man's threat echoing in my ears. I had to ensure Edith's safety while still protecting myself, so I decided to pretend to comply and signal for help inside. I nodded slowly to the man and walked toward him, my steps heavy. As I approached, I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and dialed 911 without looking, hoping the operator would hear everything. The man gestured for me to get into the van, but I paused, asking, "Where is Edith? I need to see she's okay." He smirked and showed me a photo on his phone. Edith sitting in a room, looking frightened but unharmed. "She's fine for now," he said. This deception was costing me my chance at immediate escape, and the fear was a cold weight in my chest. Just then, a car pulled up sharply behind the van, and Mr. Evans stepped out, holding up his phone. "I've recorded this, and the police are on their way," he shouted. The man cursed and shoved me aside, jumping into the van as it sped off. I stumbled, but caught myself, my heart racing. Mr. Evans helped me up and explained he'd been tracking my phone since the shelter incident for safety. We hurried into the investigator's office, where I met Carl, a retired detective with a kind face. I showed him the list of names and the evidence from the cloud, and he agreed to help dig deeper. As we talked, my phone buzzed. A call from the police saying they'd found Edith at a nearby warehouse, scared, but safe. She had been taken there as leverage, but they rescued her after tracing the van's plates. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Carl handed me a file he'd already compiled on Arthur Klein, showing bank transfers to Mark and others. "This is enough for arrests," he said. But as we reviewed it, my phone rang again, a blocked number. I answered, and a distorted voice said, "Drop the case, or we'll release your medical records to the public." I hung up, my hands shaking. Mr. Evans advised me to let the authorities handle it now, but I knew I had to see this through. Later, back at the shelter, Edith and I hugged, grateful for each other's safety. But as I settled in for the night, I received an email with attachments. My private medical files, including mental health evaluations from years ago. They were trying to discredit me, and I realized the battle was now personal in a way I hadn't expected. The next morning, I met with the district attorney in her office, the medical files printed and laid out on her desk. I needed to prove that these releases were part of the harassment and push for swift action against Klein and Mark. The DA, a no-nonsense woman named Laura Higgs, listened intently as I explained how my privacy was violated to intimidate me. She assured me that with the evidence from Carl and the Cloud, warrants were being issued for multiple arrests, including Arthur Klein. Leaving her office, I felt a sense of progress. But the emotional toll was high. My past struggles were now public fodder. Mr. Evans walked me to my car, suggesting I stay with a relative out of state until the arrests were made. I considered it, but first I had to tie up loose ends at home. Driving back, I noticed a car following me, a sedan I didn't recognize. I took several turns, but it stayed close. I called 911 and drove to the nearest police station, pulling into the parking lot. The sedan sped away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver, a woman with sharp features, someone I'd seen in photos with Klein. Inside the station, I filed another report, and the officers offered to escort me home to collect my things. At my house, I packed a suitcase, taking only essentials and a few photos of Sarah. As I was leaving, the doorbell rang. It was a process server with a lawsuit from Mark, suing me for defamation and emotional distress. I took the papers, my hands steady despite the anger boiling inside. This was his last desperate move, and I knew it wouldn't hold up in court. But as I got into the police car, I saw a news van pulling up. Someone had tipped them off about the story. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the corruption case. I kept my head down, but one reporter slipped a note into my hand. "Meet me tonight at the park. I have info on Mark's offshore accounts." I tucked it away, unsure if it was another trap. That evening, from a safe house arranged by Mr. Evans, I pondered the note. The pressure was mounting, but I had to risk it for the final piece of evidence. I decided to go, but I wouldn't go alone. I arranged to meet the reporter at a well-lit park near the safe house, with Carl, the investigator, watching from a distance. I had to get the information on Mark's offshore accounts to complete the financial trail against him. The night air was cool, and I sat on a bench, my purse clutched tightly. The reporter, a young woman named Chloe, arrived promptly and handed me a folder. "This details the accounts in the Caymans," she said. Mark moved most of your savings there. I thanked her, but as I stood to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows. Mark himself, his face haggard and angry. I knew you'd come, he spat. Give me that folder, or I'll make sure you never see daylight again. I held my ground, my heart aching for the boy I once loved. Carl stepped forward, his presence making Mark hesitate. It's over, Mark, Carl said. The DA has everything. Mark laughed bitterly. You think this ends with me? Klein has friends everywhere. Just then, police cars arrived, lights flashing. Carl had called them. Mark was arrested on the spot for witness intimidation and violating the restraining order. As they led him away, he shouted, You were never my mother. You took everything from me. I stood there, the folder in my hands, feeling a profound sadness. Back at the safe house, I reviewed the documents with Mr. Evans. They showed millions moved offshore, enough to secure convictions for fraud and embezzlement. The next day, the news broke. Arthur Klein and several others were arrested, and the scandal rocked the city. I spent the day giving statements to investigators, finally feeling the weight lift. But in the quiet moments, I thought of Mark, the child I raised, now facing prison. I visited him in jail, but he refused to see me. I left a letter, expressing my sorrow and hope for his redemption, though I doubted he'd read it. Returning to my house, now secure and peaceful, I knew the legal battle was won, but the personal war had left scars. I sat in Sarah's room, holding her journal, and allowed myself to cry for all that was lost. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I sold the house, using the funds to pay off legal debts and donate to a victims advocacy group in Sarah's name. I moved into a small apartment near the ocean, where the sound of waves brought a calm I hadn't felt in years. I simply wanted to find peace and live out my days without fear. I lost my family in the process, but I gained a deeper understanding of my own strength. I kept in touch with Edith, who had found a new home, and we met for tea often, sharing stories like old friends. Mr. Evans updated me that Mark had pleaded guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, and he was transferred to a facility where he could get counselling. I never heard from him again, but I hoped he might find peace someday. One afternoon, I visited Sarah's grave, placing fresh flowers on the stone. I read her journal aloud, feeling her presence in the breeze. I realized that justice for her didn't require hatred. It came through truth and remembrance. Back at my apartment, I started writing my own story, not for revenge, but to leave a record of resilience. I joined a local book club and even volunteered at the library, reading to children. The past didn't define me anymore. It was a chapter I had closed. As I watched the sunset over the water, I felt a quiet contentment. The battles were over, and those scars remained. They were part of who I am now. I smiled, thinking of Sarah, and knew she would have been proud. Life was simpler now, filled with small joys, a good book, a friend's call, the steady rhythm of the sea, and that was enough.